Welcome, everyone. I'm Craig Story from the biology department. We're welcoming you now to the Crum lecture. As the president of Gordon's Honor Society, it's an honor for me to be able to introduce our guests and explain what the Crum lecture is. Today's Crum lecture is sponsored by Phi Alpha Chi, Gordon's premier academic honor society. After Gordon's merger with Barrington College in 1985, the executive committee of Phi Alpha Chi was charged with administering Barrington's Crum Lectureship Fund. Named for Terrell B. Crum, who was the academic dean of Providence Bible Institute and Barrington College for 40 years. It was Dean Crum who hired Marvin Wilson back in 1963, as well as Dr. Roger Green in 1970, professor of New Testament who retired recently from Gordon College as well. The Crum Lectureship Fund allows us to bring well-known speakers to campus, such as our speaker today, and we're thankful for this resource, as it also keeps the memory of Barrington College alive on campus. Today's speaker, Paul Douglas, is a nationally respected meteorologist with 34 years of broadcast television and 36 years of radio experience. Douglas became interested in weather and public service at a young age, including having an inspiring ninth grade teacher and also living through the devastation of Tropical Storm Agnes, June 19 through 24, 1972. I looked this up online and I found a picture of Richard Nixon looking out the window of an airplane at the floods in Pennsylvania. It's an amazing storm. This storm caused 48 deaths in Pennsylvania and even filled Paul's own basement with water, which caused his mom to shriek in alarm upon opening the door. I'm sure that left a lasting impression on 14-year-old Paul. After this experience, he developed a network of flood gauges which were monitored by ham radio operators during flash flood situations. Douglas graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology from Pennsylvania State University in 1980, and since then his passion for meteorology has led him to launch a series of companies that personalize the weather experience, making meteorology more accessible, relevant, and actionable on multiple media platforms. In 1990, he launched Earthwatch 3D weather graphics on KARE TV, and then licensed software to TV stations worldwide. Steven Spielberg used Earthwatch software in Jurassic Park and Twister, famous films many of you have seen. Currently, Douglas is the president of Aris Weather Services, based in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, I mentioned these two cities because many of you won't know what I'm talking about when I say Twin Cities. Am I right? It's a beautiful part of the country. I got to go there last summer, and yes. Since founding Aris in 2008, the company has been combining the power of data, custom graphics, studios, and meteorologists to create content that helps businesses launch custom weather solutions. Paul has previously authored 2 books on weather, but his latest book is on the topic of climate change. The book, Caring for Creation, is co-authored with Mitch Hescox, president of the Evangelical Environmental Network. Climate science is something he never set out to study, and a field he would not have predicted he would need to think about as a weatherman. But with the symptoms becoming more and more visible in the weather, it was something he could not ignore. Please join me now in welcoming Paul Douglas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Appreciate it, Craig. And I got to check out the honeybees upstairs. The bees are just fine. It's kind of cool. Part of the tour. It's really good to be here, and thank you for the nice, warm welcome. Thank you, Hannah, for being a great tour guide. And what's not to like about Gordon College? Wow. It really is good being here. True confession, I was raised Baptist, Lutheran, and Presbyterian. My parents were always shopping for a better deal. I accepted the Lord when I was 13 and haven't looked back. So I'm going to try to cover a fair amount of ground today. And I just want to make sure, yeah. This is our cabin up in northern Minnesota. We call it our slice of heaven. And I grew up west of Philadelphia, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the Amish country, and it took me a while to get the whole lake thing. You know, we always went to the shore. But the lakes are amazing. In the summer, you swim in them, you boat in them, wakeboarding, and in the winter, the ice is thick enough that you can drive on the lakes if you want to. I never saw the appeal. Ice fishing, pretty amazing. What a climate. I consider myself an evangelical Christian. I am for the record, a moderate Republican. Remember those? Yeah. And when some people, when they hear environmentalists, they think regulation or overregulation. I identify with Teddy Roosevelt as a conservationist. Conservation is a great moral issue. It involves the patriotic duty of ensuring the safety and continuance of this great nation. I think we have a spiritual and moral obligation to preserve the America we grew up with for our kids, for future kids. We don't own any of this. We lease everything. We are passing through, and we have an obligation as stewards. I was an Eagle Scout. If it wasn't for Weather Merit Badge and Agnes, I might have a real job right now. And we're a military family. My youngest son went to the Naval Academy. That's Brett right there, flying an MH-60 Sikorsky submarine killer helicopter. He's actually deployed right now in the Persian Gulf, right off the coast of Iran. So when you're the parent of a young man or a woman who's deployed, you watch the news differently than you would otherwise. So I'm very proud of Brett, proud of both my sons. Had a good run in broadcasting. We did the weather outside. That picture in the upper left, my first TV job, I was still at Penn State, and I did weekend weather, and they paid me $50 a weekend. Didn't do it for the money. But what I found in life the hard way is sometimes you just get your foot in the door. Don't worry about the money. Just get in. Once you're in, you can move up. But I'll never forget my first job at WNEP. The news director took me out to the outdoor set, and I was incredulous. I'm like, you want me to stand outside? He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, yeah, the public likes it when you get rained on or snowed on. And the worse the weather, the higher the ratings. It's sick, man. That is sick. And then he turned to me and he said, Paul, if you're outside, at least you'll get the current weather right. Burn. So, from that day on, I never trusted the news director, and I always wanted to have a job on the side, a business on the side. I had 11 radio stations when I was at Penn State, and that helped to pay my way through Penn State, and it gave me a little taste of freedom. And so, even though I had on-air jobs, radio, television, few years in Chicago, most of my career in the Twin Cities, it was always nice having the freedom of having a job on the side. And I always encourage people, no matter what your situation, what's your plan B, what's your plan C, what's your plan D? Because life never, ever, ever works out exactly the way you think it's going to work out. Now I have a radio gig, which again, didn't see coming. 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday, on WCCO, which is sort of the WBZ of Minnesota. 12 segments a day, and I can't fill them all with weather and climate change. So it forces me to get up to speed on topics that I might not be up to speed on. So I think it's a good thing. I've always enjoyed talking about the weather, trying to make the weather more accessible. As Craig mentioned, we invented three-dimensional weather graphics because I was bored with the graphics I was using at my first job in the Twin Cities. So we went out and developed 3D weather graphics, kind of like a virtual reality, almost like a video game where you could fly into the weather, simulated rain, simulated lightning, sort of a space shuttle flight into the weather. That was called Earthwatch. And then in about 1998, we started another company called Digital Cyclone. We thought we could make a more accurate forecast, and we actually did. We blew through about $8 million in financing before we ran out of money. And in 1 week, I had to lay 55 out of 60 people off, which that's a bad week. It seems like all my businesses had some sort of a near-death experience. And we reinvented ourselves as a cell phone weather business, a wireless weather business. Doppler on your phone. Now everybody, just about everybody, can access radar on their phone. Back in 2001, it was new. And our big customers were Verizon and AT&T and Sprint. So, and my brush with fame, Steven Spielberg's people called up and said, we're making a movie about dinosaurs. It's called Jurassic Park, and Steve would like to use your software for the control room scenes. So I got to meet Steve, and he explained the look he was after, the special effects, and we did those special effects, and I guess they turned out okay. A couple of years later, we get another call. Paul, we're making a movie about tornadoes. We'd like to use your software. So I drive down to Ames, Iowa. They converted a barn into a high-tech weather center. And this is where they were doing the filming of the meteorologists who were guiding the chasers to the tornadoes. And I thought I'd just be supervising special effects. And I walk in, and they go, hey, Paul, you want to be in the movie? And I'm thinking big romantic scene with Helen Hunt. Why are you laughing? Yeah, they weren't thinking that either. So my line is, I'm looking at the Doppler radar, and my big line, my only line is, hey, Bryce, you better come here and take a look at this. I think it's the highlight of the movie, but if you blink, if you sneeze, you will miss my big scene. But I still get residual checks twice a year from Warner Brothers. Pretty impressive. Walking back from the mailbox, and I got my Warner Brothers check, and I open it up, and yeah. So God has a way of keeping you humble, right? The film career is not working out so well. It's been an interesting ride. But I'm a serial entrepreneur. The joy is taking an idea and trying to take that idea, attract a team of smart people, people that are smarter than I am, and create a business model that is sustainable and profitable. Taking the idea, turning it into a product or a service. And that only works if you can attract really, really smart people. So, as an entrepreneur, if I ignore data that makes me nervous or makes me squirm, if I just ignore big chunks of actual evidence, I will go out of business. I will eventually declare bankruptcy. I don't have the luxury of ignoring data. Everybody has to be open to data, even if it makes you uncomfortable. We hear a lot about, climate change. Is it global warming? It's cold today, Paul. How can the planet be warming if I'm cold today, Paul? The climate has always changed, Paul. We had an ice age, Paul. I say, yes. And chances are that it's not the volcanoes, it's not solar radiation, it's not aerosols. This time around, we are probably the ones nudging the climate in a specific direction. And these are some of the maps that made me do a double take. This is the percentage of the United States that is in extreme drought or extreme flood. It's called the Climate Extreme Index. This is from NOAA, the National Weather Service folks, from the National Climatic Data Center. Back in the 60s, 70s, routinely 15, 20% of America was in drought, or extreme flood. Weather and climate never moves in a straight line, but if you step back and you look at the trends and you're honest with yourself, you can see the direction that things are going. Now, typically it's closer to 30% of America in extreme drought or extreme flood. The rain is falling harder. That's not a climate model. That's based on actual observations. You warm up the air, even a couple of degrees doesn't sound like much. It can hold more water, and that water is going to come down faster and harder. This is the number of extreme rainfall events in the United States in the lower 48. And again, not a straight line, but you can see the trends in extreme one-day precipitation amounts. We are, in essence, loading the dice in favor of more of these extreme rains. We aren't creating new storms, but the storms that would have formed naturally are juiced. They're amped up. They're spiked. They have more moisture. And that moisture is coming down faster. Billion-dollar weather disasters, geophysical disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes have held steady, while extreme storms, floods, severe storms have been on the increase. And again, this is a NOAA graphic, but the same kind of data exists from insurance companies all around the world. The insurance companies have to price risk accurately or they go out of business. So they're looking at the same data. And this is the stuff that made me, over time, do a double take and a triple take. I'm just a meteorologist. I don't pretend to be a climate scientist. But by the late 90s, early 2000s, I was seeing the symptoms of climate volatility and weather disruption showing up on the weather map. Not every day, not even every week, but with increasing frequency, things were different. The patterns were changing. And I started talking about this. It wasn't an overnight epiphany, and it had nothing to do with Al Gore. What we really have is weather on steroids. Droughts that would have formed naturally, floods that would have formed naturally are amped up, juiced. Last year, 19 major floods in the U.S., 160 natural disasters, the most since 1980, when records began, according to reinsurance company Munich Re. And this year, we've had some crazy hurricanes. Hurricanes, of course, get their energy from warm ocean water. The warmer the water, the more intense these storms can become. In my career, I've never seen one storm produce 64.5 inches of rain. And you increasingly will see things that make you shake your head and go, wow, haven't seen that before. Irma, the strongest Atlantic hurricane on record, water temperatures were 86 degrees. You need about 80, 81 degrees to get a hurricane. 86 degrees, deep layer of warm water. So again, revving up, amping up the storms that would have formed naturally. Maria, it's going to take a long time for Puerto Rico to get back to any semblance of normal. When that thing hit, it was the equivalent of an EF4 tornado. But the eye wall of Maria, where the most damaging winds were right around the eye, roughly equivalent to an EF4 tornado that's 50 miles wide. That is what tracked right across Puerto Rico. So 30 years ago, the climate model said, well, wet areas should get wetter and dry areas should get drier. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And New England has seen the biggest increase in these extreme rainfall events. A 71% increase between 1958 and 2012 in the amount of precipitation falling in very heavy rain events. Again, this is not a model. This is based on actual observations. And we're seeing this worldwide. It's not just here. It's all across the planet. When it does rain, it's raining harder with a greater potential for flooding. Just since 2010, and I'm all for serendipity and coincidences, but in the last 7 years, America has experienced 25 separate 500-year floods. Harvey was a 1 in 25,000-year flood. And we're going to see more of these kinds of head-shaking events. The symptoms are going to be harder to dismiss and deny over time. And here's the thing. The atmosphere doesn't care what you believe. The atmosphere responds to physics. You warm up the air, it can hold more water vapor. That water vapor is going to come down in the form of heavy rain. And a lot of people kind of curl up into the fetal position and shut down. You know, you're depressing us with the gloom and doom. My attitude is, we're going to figure this out. We have to figure it out. And the solutions are at hand. We have the solutions. They are literally staring us in the face. God had the good sense of burying the dinosaur juice, the carcinogenic, polluting dinosaur juice, and he put a free, fusion-safe nuclear reactor directly above our heads. He could not have made it any more obvious. We're called to be stewards. Here's one interpretation of Luke 16:2. Man has been appointed as a steward for the management of God's property. Ultimately, he will give account for his stewardship. We are called to be stewards. We are tending what's left of Eden. Genesis. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. We were made in God's image. He gave us big, beautiful brains, the ability to think rationally, logically, improve our lives, make smart decisions, and have the good sense not to foul our nest. So I've been speaking out, and as a moderate conservative and an evangelical Christian, people look at me and, you must be confused, Paul. Don't you realize this has become politicized? This is now part of the culture wars. Say, no, it's data. And we have an obligation to keep our eyes open and our minds open. Some people talk about dominion. Yeah, God gave us dominion, but that does not mean that we can do whatever we want with no consequences. As my father said, my dad escaped East Germany. He survived Hitler. He survived Stalin. He said, we have rights and we have responsibilities. And this comes down to personal responsibility. And it's fairly conservative. If you make a mess, clean up your mess. God gave us free will. He made the car, but we're the ones with our hands on the steering wheel, and we are accountable. And I tell people the truth. Okay, I'm a scientist, I'm a meteorologist. Science is essential, but it's incomplete. I believe in absolutes. I believe in faith, things that fall outside of the scientific method. I acknowledge data and test the science. This is from the book I wrote with Mitch, Caring for Creation, the Evangelical's Guide to Climate Change and a Healthy Environment, talking about the limits of science. I don't worship science. There's impermanence to the scientific method. One never quite reaches solid bedrock. There's always a new observation, a new discovery, a radical theory, more testing. We look at the universe through a pinhole as God gradually reveals himself to us. Call me crazy, but I think conservatives should probably conserve. Otherwise, a major rebranding effort is going to be required. Teddy Roosevelt, the national park system, envy of the world. Say what you will about Richard Nixon. He launched the EPA and the Clean Air Act. George H.W. Bush reinforced that Clean Air Act, all acknowledging that, yes, of course, business is important. A powerful economy is critical, but we need to balance that with caring for where we live. Clean air, clean water, stable climate should not be a partisan issue. These should be rights. You know who said this? I'm proud of having been one of the first to recognize that states and the federal government have a duty to protect our natural resources from the damaging effects of pollution that can accompany industrial development. Anybody want to guess who said this? Nixon? Any other guesses? Who said that? Bing, 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 bing. Congratulations, you win nothing except my admiration. Good work. Yeah, Ronald Reagan said that. Really? Yes. We have an obligation to balance the two. And I think this is the civil rights challenge of the 21st century. Putting the profits of corporate polluters ahead of the health of today's kids and the welfare of your kids is immoral and unsustainable. Do the rights of special interests outweigh the common good? There's no silver bullet, but there's plenty of silver buckshot. New technologies which are already being deployed, which we need to move faster. The reason there's so much confusion, hey, is climate change real? Is it not real? Is it a liberal thing? There's so much money. Trillions and trillions of dollars at stake. And the Chevrons and the Exxon Mobils of the world, they want to harvest all that carbon, that oil, that coal. Their stock price depends on it. Their existence depends on it. So they see clean, renewable energy as a threat. It is a disruptor. You know, they could be the ones selling the horse and buggies as the cars come onto the scene. And they're not going down quietly. They are being disrupted and they are pushing back. And they are seeding the market, especially the United States, with a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of pseudoscience. But here's what I think, that this is not necessarily going to be solved politically. Economics and energy security will ultimately drive solutions and decarbonization, not politics. It'd be nice if we could come up with a price on carbon, one that includes all externalities, including diseases, asthma, air pollution, et cetera, and climate change. That may not happen. That may not ever happen. But it doesn't matter, because the market is moving even faster. We are in the midst of an amazing revolution. a disruption. The energy industry is being disrupted, just like every other business out there. Renewable energy is now giving us the tools to solve climate change and prove American exceptionalism. One more time. My prediction, clean energy is going to wag the climate change dog. Even if you don't care about clean energy, if you don't care about climate change, you think it's a hoax, you think it's a conspiracy, chances are you're going to want to save money. I have yet to meet anybody, I don't care what your politics is, who doesn't want to save money. And clean energy is already starting to save money. Take away all subsidies. Solar and wind now is competitive and even a little cheaper in some cases than natural gas, considerably cheaper than coal. It's the market at work. And I ask people, do you like saving money? And most people say yes. And this is why, fundamentally, I am optimistic, because prices are falling so fast. Solar, wind, energy storage, biofuels, hydro, geothermal. Onshore wind costs have dropped 40% in the last 5 years. There's 4 times the supply of wind energy just offshore than current U.S. demand. Plenty of untapped wind. Enough sun hits the Earth's surface in 1 hour to power the world's economy for an entire year. It's there. It's free energy. Why on earth wouldn't we take advantage of it? And unsubsidized solar is now the cheapest form of new electricity. And some of the fossil fuel folks say, well, subsidies, blah, 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 they wouldn't be competitive if it wasn't for subsidies, when in fact, to be honest, fossil fuels have gotten subsidies for well over a century. Okay, so let's get rid of all subsidies. Let's let the markets work. The best solutions, the cheapest solutions, are the ones that should prevail. Energy storage, these big batteries, monster batteries like the Tesla Powerwall, 50% drop in battery costs just since 2014. My attitude is, and I'm not alone, let the markets work. I'm a capitalist. Let the markets work. But we need to turn up the dial and move faster. And I talked to some of my conservative friends about energy independence and why on earth would we want to be dependent on countries that don't like us very much, like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. Pretty long list of some of these OPEC countries. Richard Nixon was talking about energy independence in the 1970s. Ronald Reagan talked about energy independence. We finally have a shot at true energy independence. We have enough energy in this country, and we can continue to ramp up renewables as we dial down fossil fuels. More competition, more choice, more good-paying jobs. It's already happening. This year, 187,000 jobs in the oil, natural gas, and coal industry when it comes to generating electricity. Twice that number in the solar field, and it's growing much more rapidly. Energy security. Most people like the idea of not being dependent on the grid. All you need is one hacker infecting the grid, bringing down the grid. All you need is one X-class solar flare that suddenly, in the blink of an eye, sends us back to the middle 1800s. Why on earth wouldn't we want to have alternatives like solar and wind? Local, decentralized. So I'm optimistic. At the end of the day, the arc of technology favors progress. Nothing dirty about progress. Why on earth would we want to be dependent on a grid structure that was rolled out in the 1940s and 1950s? What worked in the 50s is probably not going to work in the 2020s and the 2030s. I've had 34 cars, and I've loved them all dearly. I'm driving a Tesla now, that white Tesla. My wife thought I was insane. Why would you do that? I traded in a 12-cylinder twin turbo. 2012, I was driving this 12-cylinder twin turbo car, and it made a great sound. But one day I pulled into the garage and I realized, you hypocrite. You're talking about climate change, and you're driving this pig that gets 16 miles to the gallon. Not good. So I was waiting until I knew that Tesla would round the corner and that they wouldn't go bankrupt. Hoping they wouldn't go bankrupt. And so I bought a gently used Model S, and it's the best thing I've ever done. The great thing about Tesla, there's 150 moving parts on that car. Typical gas-powered car, 10,000 moving parts. There's less that can go wrong. Tesla says, you can bring it in once a year, we'll rotate the tires, but you don't have to bring it in for maintenance. Huh? There's no place to put the oil. It takes no gas. I charge it up in my garage. Our electric rates have not gone up. My insurance rates have gone down $1,000 a year. I am paying less. It feels like I'm driving for free. There's a return on investment. Yeah, it was expensive, but now you can get the Model 3. They're priced in the 30s, and they go 320 miles. Mark my words, within 3 years, 4 years tops, they'll be priced in the 20s, and they will go 500 miles. And there will be charging stations everywhere. Your kids, you and your kids, future kids, won't think twice about electric. It's cheaper, it's reliable, there's a true return on investment. And it's not just Tesla. The other day, General Motors said, basically, we are moving towards all electric. China and some countries in Europe have banned fossil fuel cars and trucks by the year 2023. No more new fossil fuel vehicles. It's all going electric. Because it's less, it's cheaper. Yeah, it's better for the air, but it's cheaper. We're building a new house, and we're wiring it for solar shingles. These are shingles that look like real shingles, but they actually generate electricity. Instead of a solar panel, they're shingles. And they're working on solar paint, solar film. You put a film on the window, and it generates electricity. It's free energy. Why wouldn't we take advantage of that? There is a smarter, more sustainable way to keep the lights on and people employed. What I worry about, who's going to lead the energy revolution? Is it the United States? Is it China? China, they're not debating the science. They acknowledge the climate is changing, and they have a horrific air pollution problem. They are not debating the scientists. I hope we are the epicenter of that energy revolution, and it isn't in Finland or Israel or Norway or China. And again, energy freedom has a nice ring. I tell people, sustainability, clean energy, a smarter way to push forward does not require a radical change in your lifestyle. You don't have to shave your head unless you want to. You don't have to become a vegetarian unless you want to. You don't have to pedal a rickshaw or live in a yurt. It's fun to say, yurt. America has a habit of engineering around seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The same country that sent men to the moon, that split the atom, that invented the internet, that mapped the human genome, that cured polio, we can figure out ways to keep the lights on without polluting and without making the climate situation even worse. It's time for real American exceptionalism. And I'm optimistic for two reasons. The arc of technology, falling prices for wind and solar specifically, and your generation, as a rule, is not as skeptical and cynical as your parents and your grandparents. You see what's happening, and quite frankly, you folks are the ones that are going to have to clean up our mess and come up with these solutions and implement these solutions and find ways to keep things going in spite of increased volatility. I tell people the world isn't ending. Not yet. It is warming, and that will have a threat, and it will also have an opportunity associated with it. An opportunity for reinvention. I'm on the board of the Evangelical Environmental Network. People are always amazed they didn't know that there was such a thing. Evangelicals concerned about creation care? Ministers, former ministers, lay people that are concerned about pollution, the impact of short-term pollution, and climate change. Mitch Hescox and I wrote this book attempting to make the case for other Christians who think this might all just be political, or this, if you somehow acknowledge that the climate is changing, that makes you a liberal. Mitch had a stat that made me do a triple take. He said 1 in 3 kids today suffers either extreme asthma, allergies, ADHD, or autism. 1 in 3. I think we can all agree fewer chemicals in the environment, probably a good thing. This is not about polar bears. This is about our kids and their kids. And what obligations, what responsibilities do we have to those who come next? Conservatives like to talk about individual freedoms, property rights. I think we all should have the freedom to live where we want to live without fear of rising seas, perpetual drought, running out of water, or toxic weather hitting home every other month. In the Constitution, a lot of talk about the right to life, liberty, and property. There's also something called the public trust doctrine that says government is responsible for the preservation of certain vital resources for public use. And again, clean air, clean water, and a stable climate. This should be non-negotiable. And right now, a group of young people are suing the federal government using the public trust doctrine to get them to pay attention to climate change and to come up with real solutions. Matthew 25:45, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me. Christ was pretty explicit. Jesus didn't just say, yeah, take care of yourself, take care of your family, that's fine, that's enough. Okay. We're supposed to care for everyone, especially the least among these, the poor. And the poor are the first to be impacted by climate volatility and weather disruption. It's tragic. 35,000 Americans lose their lives. I was at a funeral for one of my nieces last Saturday who died in a traffic accident. And twice as many people die prematurely in this country, in America, from air pollution, asthma, respiratory problems, premature deaths. 5 million premature deaths worldwide every year because of air pollution. Here's the thing. 100 million people around the world live within 3 feet of sea level. For them, Rising seas is not an abstraction or a minor inconvenience. They will have to move. There will be migrations that we can't even imagine. People can live without a lot of things, but if they don't have clean water and they can't grow food, they're going to move. This is why the military takes this so seriously, because it's a threat multiplier. I saw this sign the other day: God's glory shines through his creation. I don't worship creation. I worship the Lord when I protect his creation and protect his people. We are accountable. A minister in Minnesota sent me a note. He said, reading the Bible as if it gives us license to pillage the earth and pollute the atmosphere is a gross distortion of God's holy and inspired word. Likewise, focusing on one's own individual salvation without care or concern for all people and creatures God has made is selfish, prideful, and destructive to God's kingdom. We have a moral responsibility to speak out and to lead as Christians. Leith Anderson, the National Association of Evangelicals, said we need to move past debating and focused on the poorest of the poor, who are neither scientists nor politicians, but are the most affected by how we care for God's creation. Billy Graham said it best: we lease everything on this planet. We don't own anything. My home is in heaven. I'm just traveling through this world. I'm passing through. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his power he meditates day and night. Defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. We have been loaned an amazing gift: creation. None of this is a coincidence, but we have an obligation to not look away. Martin Luther King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. I don't pretend to know what Jesus would do, what he would say. Having studied Scripture like everybody in this room, having studied his words, his ministry, he might have two questions. Did you protect my Father's home? And did you defend his children? What will we tell him? Thank you.